It started with a confession disguised as kindness. Iris Delacroix stood over his hospital bed, sunlight cutting through the blinds like clean blades, and whispered, "I forgive you." Caleb, her ex-lover, her betrayer, her almost, smiled through the bruises. "I knew you would," he said, voice hoarse, weak, but certain. She touched his hand, the unburned one, and thought, "Of course you did." Forgiveness was her performance, not her peace. She'd perfected it for men like him, the kind who mistook empathy for surrender. When Caleb cheated, he'd called it a mistake made in grief, as if loss were a license. She hadn't cried. She'd only asked, "Was she worth it?" And he'd answered, "She reminded me of you." The day she left, he laughed and told her she'd come back. He'd been right, technically. But the woman who returned wasn't his Iris anymore. She was something quieter, sharper, and patient enough to use love like a weapon. She took care of him after the accident. The police said he'd fallen asleep at the wheel. She suspected the opposite. Caleb had always preferred drama to death. He woke up broken and beautiful, and she was the only one who came. Everyone else had moved on. "You stayed," he said once, his voice thick with awe. "You still love me." She smiled, almost tender. "I do." And she meant it, in her own way. Because love, in its truest form, is the most precise kind of violence. She fed him, dressed him, read his favorite books aloud. Each day she reminded him of their old life, the laughter, the promises, the things he'd ruined. He thought she was nostalgic. She was rehearsing. After months of healing, he began walking again. Slowly, painfully, but always toward her. The doctors called it miraculous. Iris called it choreography. She let him believe she was rebuilding him, when really she was teaching him dependency, a softer leash made of gratitude. When he could finally drive again, she suggested a trip to the coast. "You need closure," she told him. He didn't notice her slip something into the glove compartment, his old phone, restored. Full of messages he thought he'd deleted. She'd saved every one. Halfway through the drive, she asked him to stop by the cliffs. The wind was cold, the sky the color of bruised glass. She stood beside him, close enough to smell the salt and regret. "You ever think about what love does to people like us?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "It ruins us." She shook her head. "No, it arms us." He turned to look at her then, confusion soft in his eyes. Just as his phone buzzed in the glove box, she watched the color drain from his face when he saw the screen, her messages. All forwarded to his wife, his clients, his church group. Every lie, every confession, every word he'd thought he buried. When he looked back at her, he was already shaking. "You." She touched his face, gentle as prayer. "I forgave you," she said. That was the weapon. He stumbled backward, one step too many, the edge of the cliff behind him. For a moment, the wind held everything still, the world, the truth. His body, before gravity remembered its role. When the sound came, it wasn't a scream. It was release. Later, when the police asked, Iris told the truth. "He slipped," she said. "I loved him." Both statements were correct. Months later, standing in her garden, she found one of his cufflinks in the soil, shining like a small piece of guilt. She picked it up and smiled. Love hadn't ruined her. It had refined her aim. By the second act, forgiveness had become the stage and love its performance. Iris stayed near the cliff house, the same one where Caleb had fallen, because the world insisted. It was healing. Reporters called her the woman who forgave too much. Strangers sent flowers. And sometimes, when the wind blew right, she could almost hear his voice rising from the waves, rehearsing one last apology. She didn't move on. She moved inward. She turned their story into a lecture series, Emotional Ethics and the Anatomy of Betrayal. It sold out in 3 cities. The irony wasn't lost on her. She spoke about trust as a science, forgiveness as an art. People took notes while she dissected her own heartbreak like a patient on an autopsy table. But the night after her first keynote, she found an envelope waiting in her hotel room. No name, no return address. Inside, a single cufflink, the twin to the one she'd buried in the garden, and a note that read, "Love was the weapon, not the wound." She froze. The handwriting was his. At first, she thought it was a cruel trick, some fan mimicking her past. But the cufflink was real, scratched in the exact place where he'd once dropped it on their kitchen floor. She threw it in the sink and poured herself a drink. That night, she dreamed of the cliff. But this time, she wasn't standing above it, she was below, looking up. And in the dream, Caleb stood where she had once stood, watching her with a smile both tender and cruel. "You didn't kill me," he said. "You made me permanent." When she woke, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. One message: "I still forgive you." She deleted it, blocked the number, and tried to rationalize. People fake things. Algorithms mimic voices. Ghosts are just data now. But the next morning, when she opened her laptop to prepare her next talk, the file she'd written was gone, replaced with a document titled The Fire Sermon, authored by Caleb A. Delacroix. She opened it. The first line read, "I loved a woman who thought forgiveness meant mercy. She was wrong. It meant control." Each paragraph twisted the narrative, reassigning guilt with surgical precision. By the time she finished reading, she wasn't sure which version of the story was true anymore, the one where he fell or the one where she pushed. That night, Iris stood by the window overlooking the ocean, the same horizon that had swallowed him. The wind was heavy with salt and memory. She thought about deleting everything, his words, her career, the myth of redemption. But as she reached for the laptop, she saw her reflection in the glass. It was smiling. "You see?" It whispered, her voice layered over his. "Love was never the wound. It was the weapon. You just finally learned how to use it." And then the lights flickered, briefly, in time with her heartbeat. By the 3rd year, her career had turned her crime into gospel. Iris's lectures were now global, packed auditoriums, podcasts, documentaries titled The Anatomy of Forgiveness. People quoted her like scripture. She smiled on stage, polished, unbreakable, while inside she could still hear Caleb's voice whispering through applause. "You didn't kill me. You made me eternal." It began quietly, the same way every haunting begins, with recognition. The first time she saw him was in a photograph sent by an anonymous email. A crowd shot from her latest event, hundreds of faces blurred by motion except one, his, half hidden behind a column, smiling. The timestamp matched the date exactly. She deleted it, but the image stayed, burned behind her eyelids. She told herself it was impossible. Yet at her next talk, during the signing line, a man leaned in close enough for her to smell salt and smoke. "You said love was the weapon," he murmured, voice warm and low. But who was holding it? Then he disappeared before she could look up. That night, her hotel room door clicked open on its own. Inside, the same cufflink she'd thrown into the sea lay on the pillow, polished clean. The note beside it read, "You perfected the art. Now teach me how to survive it." The next day, her assistant found her notes rewritten, her tidy lecture script replaced with paragraphs written in a handwriting almost like hers but not quite. Love never died. It just changed weapons. Iris tried to continue as normal, but every reflection betrayed her. In mirrors, she looked older, ash on her collarbone, soot under her nails. In interviews, her recorded voice would glitch, layering Caleb's beneath her own so that every "I forgive you" became "we forgive you." At home, her phone buzzed again. Same unknown number. One message: the ocean gives back what the fire takes. She drove to the cliffs that night. The wind howled through the burned grass, the sea below endless and dark. When lightning flashed, she saw him, or the suggestion of him, standing where he'd fallen. His outline shimmering faintly, as if lit from within. "Why are you here?" she shouted. He smiled, the way he had when he thought cruelty was intimacy. "Because you're still playing the part. I'm not afraid of you." He stepped closer, though his feet left no mark. "I know. That's what makes it work." The next morning, the newspapers ran a story: Drive. Iris Delacroix to publish her final book. Love was the weapon, not the wound. The press release quoted her perfectly, except she hadn't written it. The dedication read, "For Caleb, who taught me that resurrection is just another kind of revenge." When she looked at the manuscript file, it was blank. Except for one line at the bottom of the page, still being typed, slowly, as she watched. "I forgive you again. This time, don't survive it." By the fourth year, the boundary between Iris and Caleb had dissolved into narrative. The world saw her as a scholar of forgiveness, but behind her eyes, something else was rewriting the script. Each time she spoke his name, the air around her changed temperature. Microphones distorted. Recordings caught whispers no one had said aloud. She had built a temple from her guilt, and he had learned to haunt its acoustics. The messages became more frequent. They didn't come from phones anymore, they came through sound. During her next live talk, as the audience leaned in to hear her closing line, the speakers hissed, and a familiar voice emerged. "You forgave me to feel powerful. Now forgive yourself to disappear." The audience thought it was performance art. They applauded. She froze. The static faded, but her pulse didn't. Backstage, she demanded to see the recording. The technician rewound the tape. The voice was gone, replaced by a low hum that matched her heartbeat exactly. "It's interference," they said. "Probably feedback." But when she played it alone later, she heard him again, soft, rhythmic, patient. "We wrote this together, Iris. You're just catching up." That night, she dreamed of a lecture hall filled with smoke. The audience was faceless, all wearing her smile. Caleb stood at the podium, reciting her words. When he reached the end, he looked up and said, "Now it's your turn to fall." She woke gasping, the smell of burnt paper thick in the air. Her manuscript, the real one, had been reduced to ash on the desk. Only the title remained legible. Love was the weapon, not the wound. In the morning, she received an invitation with no sender, an academic symposium titled Resurrection Through Ruin. The keynote slot had her name on it. The attached file contained only one sentence: "I'll forgive you, live." Against reason, she accepted. The event was held in the same city where he'd died, inside a theater overlooking the sea. The stage lights burned too bright, the air dry with salt. She stepped up to the podium, hands steady, breath calm. The audience waited. She began. "Love doesn't destroy people. It teaches them how." Her voice sounded strange, double-layered, hers and his. overlapping perfectly in tone and cadence. The crowd leaned in, mesmerized. Halfway through, the lights dimmed. The projector flickered on behind her, displaying footage she'd never seen. Caleb, days before his death, sitting at his desk, saying, "If I fall, she'll rise. If I rise, she'll fall. Either way, the story wins." The audience gasped. Iris turned toward the image, and saw her own shadow merging with his. Projected larger than life, indistinguishable. She stopped speaking. The room pulsed, lights syncing with her heart. "Do you still love me?" His voice asked through the speakers. She hesitated. "I never stopped." "Then come down," it said. And before she realized she'd moved, she was standing at the edge of the stage. The spotlight trembling, the ocean visible through the glass wall behind the audience, dark. Endless, waiting. They said afterward it looked choreographed. The way she smiled, the calm step forward. The sound of glass breaking like applause. The recording went viral. Viewers called it performance art. A haunting meditation on guilt and redemption. No one found her body. Only the microphone, still on, transmitting the faintest echo, her voice. Layered with his, whispering in perfect unison. Love was the weapon, not the wound. By the fifth winter, there were no more lectures, no more interviews. No more Iris, at least not the version the world recognized. The headlines had faded, the symposium footage archived under modern tragedy and psychological performance art. Yet in the small coastal town where she'd fallen, the locals still swore that on certain nights, when fog crawled over the cliffs, you could hear a woman's voice carried on the tide, lecturing to the sea. It began again one of those nights, in a half-collapsed theater by the shore. The wind pushed open the doors and the projector flickered on by itself. On the stage, an empty microphone waited, humming faintly. Then, without warning, the screen lit up, grainy footage. Time-stamped years after her supposed death. Iris stood there, older, hair white, eyes calm. Behind her, the sea raged like a congregation. "Forgiveness," she began, "is a language you speak until it speaks you back." She looked directly into the camera. "You've heard my story. You think it's about revenge. But it was never about punishment. It was about translation." He spoke in betrayal, I answered in devotion. Eventually, we became fluent. She stepped closer, her image flickering with static. "You keep asking who was guilty. You never asked who was left." The camera shook, and another figure appeared behind her, Caleb, unchanged. Untouched by death or memory. His presence was soft but undeniable. He placed a hand on her shoulder, and she didn't flinch. "We're rewriting the ending," he said. "This time, no one falls." She nodded, her voice dropping to a whisper. "We already did. We just never stopped talking on the way down." The footage ended there, abruptly. No one ever found the original tape, only copies that appeared online. Uploaded from accounts that disappeared hours later. Each version ended differently. In one, she walked into the sea. In another, she burst into flame. In the rarest, she simply smiled and whispered, "Love was the weapon, not the wound." Months later, an academic discovered an unpublished manuscript in the archives of a burned-down library. Its cover was scorched, the title barely visible. The dedication read, "For those who mistake survival for victory." The final paragraph was handwritten, the ink uneven. The words trembling as if written in the dark. "He hurt me with truth. I hurt him with meaning. The world called it love. But what we built was cleaner than that, an equation without mercy. A story that keeps burning even after it ends." The paper smelled faintly of salt and smoke. When the archivist closed the book, she noticed her reflection in the library glass. For a moment, she could have sworn it was Iris's face looking back, tired, peaceful, illuminated by invisible fire, and beside it, another face smiling faintly, saying nothing at all.